Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to be talking about flow of service, which should be interesting because I think a lot of people do this, very differently. And there's some things I'll bring up. So we're obviously going to refer to how you guys do it here in a minute, but like growing up, as most of these podcasts have been pointing back to experiences, because let's be honest, how you grow up does define how you think things should go. And it's a lot of the reasons that we do a lot of the things we do. So I remember specifically growing up, you'd go to church, somebody would open, the hymn book to page 142 or whatever, and then we'd sing that hymn. And then somebody give up and give announcements, which was literally just reading off of a bulletin that everybody also already has. And then we do some more songs, maybe a meet and greet time, and then somebody'd preach. And if he really, really wanted the Spirit to move, he'd use a song. If it wasn't a Spirit move time, we're just gonna be dismissed. You could tell if he was wanting some souls saved that day if we sang "Come as You Are." You knew, you knew that was how that worked. So, and it's really been interesting to see because when we were growing up, there wasn't the term praise and worship band maybe was a thing, but it does not refer to what it does refer to now. Like that, it's a different definition. Praise and worship was if you had more than two people on the stage not singing from a hymnal. That's what that was. So
and even that was way out of place.
Well, yeah, you didn't want to get too. As you can probably already tell, if you haven't listened to the first couple of podcasts, we were not brought up Pentecostal. So
truth.
So if you're picking up on that, so let's go into kind of how you guys do the flow of service, and then I've definitely got some references of people that I know that I talk to pretty often that aren't a part of different denominations. They do kind of set that up a little bit differently.
Yeah. So we, this could be a whole month, frankly, for us, because I say that because we've, like I've said in previous podcasts, we've been going through a lot of kind of changes and replanning kind of stuff the past few years. And so part of that is kind of this never ending flow of changes.
Yeah.
Right. And that has been a road in and of itself. But how we do it right now is at least in italics, if not bolded, right? Because it's going to change here and there, right? But how we do it right now is we'll typically, this isn't always the same, but typically we'll have one of the elders get up on purpose. And I'll explain the reasoning for that in a minute. But we have one of the elders get up and there's a announcements, if there are any. We limit that to a couple if they're important. If not, we don't even say anything. That's what websites and bulletins and Facebook is for, right? So that's kind of what we do. There might be announcements, there might not be, but then there's a call to worship, which essentially is just a scripture that is picked to read. Then we have an opening prayer. One of the areas, our vision right now, one of the areas of our growth that we want our body to grow is prayer, right? Which might sound goofy, but because it's a church and that's kind of an obvious thing. But instead of being a church who writes prayers sent your way on Facebook and never prays, we want to be a church who stops right in that moment.
Yeah.
And puts our hand on there and say, hey, let me pray for you now, instead of just telling you I'll go home and pray for you. So we're not great at it yet, but we're getting there. But I said that to say this. One of the focuses of our gathering, that we call it, is that. So we'll have the call to worship, and we have prayer, but it's not just some prayer. There's about 30 seconds, give or take, which is completely awkward at first. 30 seconds of silence where everybody kind of prays, right?
Yeah.
And it's led. Usually there's a subject matter at hand. It could be based on news or based on a vote that's taking place or whatever. Lots of different things. Single moms in our community that week, whatever, right?
Yeah.
A lot of different things. but it's guided. So we'll have 30 seconds of kind of silent prayer, and then that elder, whoever it is, will pray out loud to kind of lead everyone in prayer. Then we might have, this isn't every week, but it's pretty regularly, we'll have a responsive reading.
Okay.
So usually that's either a particular scripture or the Apostles' Creed we do sometimes. Then after that, we lead right into worship music. Usually that means 3 songs. I try to teach them. That's something that I just recently, this past year, have turned over to worship leaders and kind of let them fly right without me. Yeah. So one of the things I try to teach them is it's better to do 2 songs really well and lead us in worship than 3 songs and force it and suck on one of them because you just weren't ready. And so you're not worshiping. And if you're not worshiping, nobody else is. So usually it's 3 songs, give or take. Then there's someone will get up, their offering happens then. Someone will get up and near the end of offering and read the text for the sermon. Then directly after that, preaching, then song and or benediction, then go home. So it's the fly through is announcements, call to worship, prayer, responsive reading sometimes, singing, scripture reading and offering, preaching, song, benediction.
Yeah. But I mean, it sounds like to me that it's all there for a reason and a purpose. Like there's not something just thrown in there because we had to do that. Like there's a flow for a reason. So,
well, that's what the preaching is, but that's the only thing that we just have to do. So,
yeah. So, well, yeah. So, but I think that's important to say because I know, I mean, who knows when you're listening to this, like how big or small your church is. Yeah. But one of the things that I think that small churches do not so well sometimes is having a structured flow for the purpose of making sure that, I mean, we are on a mission here. We are specifically here to be taught as a body, to fellowship as a body. So like sometimes in smaller churches, oftentimes in smaller churches I've been in, either nobody wants to sing anything, or you'll have a plethora of people that want to do what you would call quote unquote special music. Like I've been in a church that has, literally had 4 specials on a Sunday morning. So you're talking about a 3 to 4 minute song for each of these people. And
yeah, that's a concert, bro. That's not.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, so that I get it. Some of you, not all of you, have the gift of singing, but you're all up there. So it's one of those things that we really have to be conscious of. I say all of that to say, like, if somebody is visiting that morning, like your flow of service is specifically, obviously not only, it's for your congregation, but it's also to set that tone for this is who we are. This is what we believe. So the prayer, like you mentioned, the responsive reading, for example, all of those things are set up so that if I'm there all the time, I know what this flow is, but it's not just this arbitrary flow. Like it's there for a reason. Like we're doing all of these things purposefully. The prayer thing really stands up, like what you said, like you're teaching them, sort of trying to get them in that mindset. The Apostles' Creed, again, this is just reinforcing what we believe. And on top of that, like if it is some random stranger coming in, and we might talk about this a little bit as well. You've said before, your church is very transient in a way, so you have a lot of visitors. So if it is somebody coming in that maybe they've never been to church before, maybe they're just traveling and they're visiting, like there's all sorts of reasons they could be there. They're giving an impression of who you are from that flow. Obviously when they walk in the doors, they already have one, but they're also getting a much more defined impression by that flow. So it could easily depend on if they come back or not, on just kind of that flow, how they perceive that. And again, you're not doing the flow specifically to get butts in the seat, but you are doing the flow for a reason to keep them there and to teach them that this is who we are, this is what we believe, this is what we're about. And I think it's very important to have that in mind, because if you do just like Ethel and Barney and Joe all sing their specials, like it's not that they can't sing, but is that helping the body, right? Is that what impression
Yeah.
are we given here? So
Yeah, I think like I've been that person, like growing up, where you're doing special music or something. And I know for me, and I'm certainly not going to put my where my heart was on other people, but for me, right, there was a lot of special music sung in which my heart wanted to be praised, right? It was
yeah, I
about
got you.
me. It was about me looking good or sounding good or getting pats on the back afterward, a lot more than it was about our church collectively being led in worship and leaving in awe of God, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we stress to anybody that's going to be up there in any capacity, whether you're just even taking up offering, right? Even if you're that guy, right? We want everybody, part of the family or brand new, to have an experience while they're here that is completely distractionless, in that we want you to be able to come here, worship God, and not be distracted from that because we're not prepared or because something messed up or because, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Now I'd be interested because I know great examples of this and some really poor examples of this, but is there anything you guys do, for example, during the offering time that I guess the best word to pay is explain it. So there's churches that I know that I've been to that have almost a mantra. I would disagree with their mantra and why they do it, but it is, for better or worse, their explanation to their body of why they're doing this thing. And then there's been some great churches that I've been to that did that. While the ushers are coming up to take up the offering, they are explaining, hey, this is the the gift for the body that we're using to proclaim the gospel. There's some churches, for example, don't even take up offering. They just mention that, hey, in the back there's a box, or there's in the more advanced technological churches a swiping machine or a text in to donate or text in to give kind of option.
We have that.
Do you? Yeah. So it's one of those things that like we don't where we're at. In fact, true story, there is no signal at all where I go to church. You cannot, you're talking about a distraction-free environment. You cannot receive text or look at Facebook. Like, it's not a thing that's happening, which is helpful sometimes for me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no doubt.
Completely honest. So, but it's one of those things that, and I think people are going, are you in a hole? Where are you at? There's no signal. It's a weird spot in our area that literally there's just nothing. So it's just a weird spot. But, so how do you guys kind of go about that? Because obviously there's a lot of different models.
Yeah. And I think, so we have 3 areas that we would define as areas that we, the elders, have seen as areas that we want our church body to grow in, right? Those are prayer, which I mentioned earlier, stewardship, and missional thinking. So stewardship, it's all about money, right? For most people who hear that word.
Yeah.
But when we talk about stewardship, that's actually kind of what we're addressing. The fact that the only thing people think of is money when we talk about stewardship. So that is one of the things, though. You can't get away from that.
Yeah.
Money is a thing. It's part of it. Like, the whole principle behind all of stewardship is the fact that God is the creator and owner of all things, right? So my house, I have to steward that because it's his. I have to steward that for the kingdom. With that said, part of that's money, right? So we make prayer, stewardship, and missional a part of all kinds of things that we say during a given gathering, right? And so stewardship, it's not so much that we would say, hey, this is what the money that you're going to give right now, this is what we're using it for. Like, we don't get into that necessarily, because some of that I would actually view, because of our context, as one of those distractions we're trying to get away
Gotcha.
from, right? Because of where it's at in the
Good point.
flow of the morning. I mean, I don't want to like go straight from worshiping and some powerful singing and raising his name up to worship to, okay, so if you'll all give this week, this is what we're going to give to, and this is our budget. I mean, we don't want to do that and interrupt the flow of worship and then do preaching. So most of the time,
real quick,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but like, so I've heard this before, and it almost sounds like so the flow you have set up is you're going from worship into giving almost as an extension of worship already.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're in fact, where you will hear what you're talking about specifically is usually going to be whoever's leading worship or someone on the team that they've kind of selected or knows ahead of time. That person will pray for the offering, right? Or whatever. They'll pray to lead us from worship into offering into sermon, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's mentioned there, right? In the sense that, Lord bless the money that we're giving. This is simply another extension of our worship to you. It's yours, and we pray that you'll bless it and teach us what to do with it, all that kind of stuff. So like you'll find stuff like that in the prayers, even that they pray as they're blessing it. And then, we'll have guys at the front when they're done praying, walking down the aisles, old school, walking down the aisles with the plates. And we have a slide up on the front that says, text this number to give. And then, we go from there.
Gotcha. Have you seen, I mean, just as a random off the cuff question there, that text to give, has that been a pretty utilized option for most people?
Half and half, right? It's exactly what you would expect. So my generation, our generation,
it's like this below, is way easier.
Yeah, because you can actually set up monthly payments even and don't even have to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Right. If you have a salary and you're making the same thing all the time and you have a certain amount you want to give, you can do that. And it's just a piece of cake.
Yeah.
For those folks who obviously aren't there yet, the older people, they're going to always need that plate, and that's fine. We're going to do both.
That's an awesome observation, because there's so many times we get to church and Christina's like, I forgot the checkbook again. We're going to we'll just double give next week. And
I haven't used a checkbook in probably 10 years, bro.
That literally is the only reason we have one.
Exactly.
Is for church.
Yeah.
The bank's like, why are these people still ordering checks? We're like, we go to church down here where there's no signal. Right. We can't even text to give if we wanted to.
Yeah.
The building is so like the way it's built. So anyway, awesome. So that's obviously your flow. You're mentioning that as far as how that goes. Now worship, just to kind of build on that a little bit, because I think that's a really important key. I think our generation on up, and not to discount the people before us, but I just really never saw that in the flow. But everything building on that whole worship. So worship then leads to worship in giving, which also now leads to worship in sermon and learning. And then worship also leads to the commission to go out and be missional. I think music plays that huge part of that in getting us to that point almost. I mean, it's not necessary, but it's very helpful. So obviously, I think you remember the worship wars. Most people probably remember what would be defined as the worship wars, which, in case you've lived in a cave or you came after them and you don't know of the travesty that occurred before, it was led by the great General Chris Tomlin, and he basically took hymns and reformatted them, and then it was just a travesty among travesties. Yeah. And a lot of people
how dare you, Chris Tomlin?
A lot of people did not like maybe a modern, more form of music coming into the body using drums. And I mean, I know to some of you listening, that is going to sound so silly, because in your church there's fogs and lasers, and you go, what are you talking about?
Yeah, but there's another way, bro.
Yeah. But the idea of that, of a worship leader on stage leading in that fashion, was not always the thing that happened. So how have you seen, I mean, not to get into that specifically, but obviously worship's a huge part of getting the people just in this mode of honoring God and glorifying God. So maybe you can speak to how you guys incorporate that, and more specifically, like kind of what songs do you specifically use to do that? Because I think lyrics are very important in how we do this.
Yeah. So for us, this is actually something that probably over the past couple of years, I personally have had to think through quite a bit. Our church went through some turmoil, and maybe that's something we could get to in some episode in the future or something, but it's conflict or whatever in church. But we went through some turmoil like 3.5, 4 years ago that kind of spurred on all of this change I've been talking about.
Yeah.
And coming out of that, it was myself and another woman who would alternate weeks leading worship. Okay. So I would be up there with my guitar and do it one week. I usually would have another couple of people, vocalists, up there with me. Mm-hmm. And then this other gal plays the keys, right? So she would do that as the instrument. So that's where we were for a while. So this is something that, for me personally, I've had to think through as I'm bringing on new worship leaders and phasing myself out of that to take on this new role. And so there are a couple of things, right? One, some churches I've seen use music to manipulate emotions on purpose, simply to create an atmosphere, right? And that's goofy and not biblical and not right, and and you just end up with something that isn't genuine, right? Second problem, and this is more kind of what we grew up with, not that they were all wrong, right? That's what there was there at the time, but to say we only want Grandpa Joe behind the pulpit opening a hymnal and leading us with the little, like they always
the hands, always the hands, as if he was directing a choir.
Yeah. A guy that had never taken a music class in his life knew how to do this, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, that was well and good. Like, it's fine, right? But that can also create a lack of genuine worship because it can be so emotionless, right?
Yes, it's just extremes there. Yeah, you're just doing something at the purpose of not doing the other thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, literally everything under the sun, right? Finding that balance is important. And so for us, one of the things that we do on purpose is, if you're going to introduce a new song, clear it with the elders, right? Yeah. Because part of our job as elders is being the spiritual leaders of the church, being the guard dogs of the church. And so I'll just say it, we don't want like reckless love up there. You know what I mean? Like we want to be intentional about the theology being introduced in the words. And we want people to hear the words, to sing the words, and to understand them and mean them, right? So the words have to make sense and be important and be intentional with the gospel, right? So I don't know, we do things from old hymns arranged differently.
Yeah.
Like, we have people that do Holy, Holy, Holy. We have people that do 10,000 Reasons still. We have kind of a vast array of stuff that gets done, but all of it's theologically good to go. All of it is checked and balanced, kind of. And
so that's what this is kind of a question into this. I've had this conversation with so many people. I'd love to hear your input on this. So obviously there are some great songs that for that song are theologically solid, that particular song. But it comes from...
I already know where you're going.
But it comes from maybe a church that overall is not theologically solid. But this song is great. So how do you approach that? Because here's the thing. I mean, because in the church I go to, for example, there's been songs introduced from churches that we would not align with at all, that we've sung. And the one pushback I had with, I mean, not pushback, the conversation I had with the worship leader was, hey, do you know where this is from? Do you know what these guys' theology is? I mean, just the idea of making sure, like you said, we're the guard dogs, we're putting in place things that say, hey, because it's a really awkward situation to get up there and sing a song and be like, but we don't agree with the theology of this church this is coming from. So how do you guys address that?
That is a great question. And I'll just be honest and say we haven't gotten there as far as really having a solid answer for that question. But personally, right, and I don't think anyone would disagree with this on our team of elders, but in fact, I know they wouldn't. When it comes to the song, first and foremost, lyrics are what matter, right? And I think if there's a way, not every church has the ability to do this, and I get that. Our church is pretty, like, there are a few people who are older who aren't out there technologically, right? Like on social media and stuff like that. But those people also don't have any clue who these churches are.
Yeah.
They're
not on the Instabook, huh?
Right. So I think we try to be upfront about theology, things that to watch out for, things that we disagree with. And I would like to think, so I'm going to say something that might get me in trouble, not with my church, but with our past, right? We try and strive very much so to not have ignorant people, spiritually and theologically ignorant people in our chairs. That's always going to happen because you have young Christians who don't know any better, right? But the idea is those Christians are being discipled by Christians who know what to look for and who can say, no, that's not right. If you have a church that is robust enough to be able to do that kind of thing, then I don't think it's quite as dangerous to do those songs if they're theologically awesome, right? Good to go.
Or it may not even be brought up to be an option because they already know where it comes from. So they maybe, because there's been some people that I know that are worship leaders, for example, that'll say, yeah, I like that song, but I would never sing it in a church because I can't get up there and I'm not going to intro with this is a good song, but their theology is not good. I'm just not going to sing it because I'm going to be discerning enough to know that if I do, someone might look that up. And like you said, I think it's so important, like you said, to have people, and we'll talk about this probably at another point, but to have people in your body that are living that out, that are helping and are discipling younger believers and using that discernment to say, hey, this is, maybe why or why you shouldn't, or why you should do this or why you shouldn't do that. So, but yeah, I always find that to be interesting because when those, and I say that it's very important, like what you said, that it has to be clear with the elders. Some people might be like, well, why does everything have to go through the elders? Yeah, probably a good idea. Because if it's not, if you have a pastor that's just very like, hey, do whatever, as long as the Spirit moves, super dangerous because literally anybody could get up there and say anything. And until it comes out of their mouth, like, and far too often, I think that's a really big issue. I mean, we're talking about flow of service here, but that happens. I've been at churches. I mean, the good thing about guests speaking to different churches is you get to kind of see their different flows. And what has happened before, I've been at churches where people I've been invited. They've never heard me speak before. So I'm just, first of all, I'm like, okay, sure, I'll come. I mean, you have no clue what I'm going to say, but sure. But when you get there, you kind of see that, okay, well, this is kind of how they operate in general. They just got my name from somebody, just like they just got that guy's name from somebody, and he gets up there and is borderline heretic, but nobody's saying anything. And I think if those intentional flow isn't put in place with that backing of what you said, like there's a checking with the elders, that could be a huge issue, which I think is why flow, and that's why I want to talk about it, why flow of service is so important, because it says something, whether you think it does or not, to the people that are in the pews or the people that are coming in to visit your or maybe not pews, maybe you got seats, but hold on.
Yeah, we have chairs. So.
Yeah, you got chairs. Yeah. Sorry, my internet connection said it was bad. But so anybody that comes in there, it says something to them about what you're doing. So I think that worship part is incredibly important as well. So
yeah, it is an emotional thing, right? I mean, we have it. It's an important part of what you're going to do. at any, whatever you do it in your flow of things, right? I mean, it just is.
But I think what you said, like the important part is that knowing that it is emotional, that it can bring people into that, those moments where they can come in contact with the God of the universe. It is vitally important, just as it is what you say in a sermon, to be sung by your people. So if it's not theologically correct, that is an issue. Like I've known of, not very often, but I have known of pastors that have purposefully sent their worship leaders off or paid for like online classes on theology so that they had a better base of what was happening. It wasn't just I'm up here just doing music. It was hey, these need to also be theologically sound, and this is why.
Something really I wanted to just throw out there on that kind of note is, and it really is gonna hit the nail on the head with what your original question here when it comes to like churches you don't maybe agree with theologically. The worship leaders that we have now, they want to grow. Like they're not professional musicians, right? They're good at what they do. They worship well, which is the first thing that I look for, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're skilled and you know everything, you could be professional touring, but you don't worship. It's a performance. I don't want you, right? Like that's the first thing. And so, but because of that, like they have room, and they would say this, I'm not afraid to say it because they would be the first people to say, like, when it comes to skill, knowledge, music theory, that, I mean, the technical stuff, they want to grow because they're kind of amateurs, right? Like I am, frankly. And so with that, Bethel, right? Which I don't align with theologically, but and our church doesn't align with theologically. There are things that that are important to them that we would say we're never doing that, right? But
so you're not having Chris Vallotton speak at your church?
Probably not. He's never asked. So, but you know, no one can deny how amazing the skill level of their worship is.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're amazing.
That's why
there's
they do it for literally an hour.
Yeah, there's a reason they can tour, right? They have an online training kind of thing. It's a subscription. Bethel puts it out. And it was a thing, right? Like for us to talk about as worship leaders and stuff, like, is this something that would be beneficial to you? Well, someone came to me and said, but it's them, right? Yeah. And I'm like, well, I get it. And I agree. Right. And if I thought that you guys were not mature enough to look past that stuff and use the skill that they teach, then I wouldn't suggest it. Right. But because of who we have, right, I'm comfortable enough with them not going, oh, we should be prophesying more or whatever. You know what I mean? Like I'm comfortable with what they're going to come back with. It's going to be, I'm going to look at this video and probably not that one. Right. So part of it is just knowing your worship leaders. Yeah. If we had people, I wouldn't suggest it as a thing even. But there are people who would probably look at what I just said and say, well, why are you even giving them money? Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, basically all year, I mean, that's the first thing I think you probably get pushback on. But so I think the important takeaway there is you're saying, look, this is the best or one of the best people in, for lack of a better word, the game right now that are doing this. So what can we learn from them to improve on us while shifting not shifting, but really putting this in a more doctrinally sound place, in my opinion, but using that same skill set to learn from, because obviously, I mean, like you said, I mean, if you want to learn construction, you may not go find, you know, the best guy that does construction may not be a Christian, but he's definitely going to be the best person to teach you that. And you can teach that and learn that and then use that for the glory of the kingdom. So not to make a one-to-one comparison there with Bethel, but you get the point. So, and then I'd like to end on this just a little bit since we're on the worship part of it. And that's, you know, a pretty big flow of it. But I'd like you to describe kind of how because we've talked briefly about this before, but how your team is set up, because oftentimes it is like one person every week in front of, the congregation. And I mean, just like with preaching, why I like kind of what we talked about in a previous episode with the leadership about how you guys kind of share that a little bit, because it's very easy to be overwhelmed in life in general. But same thing can happen to your worship leader. So if you want to describe your team real quick and how they kind of do that and how you found that to be, the pros and cons of that, to kind of finish this up here.
Yeah. So even as we talk about preaching, our church, the way that we function is it is a shared load. So like I would be viewed as one of the elders that has that particular maybe skill or gift. But we have myself, the pastor, who I will not, the people that we're talking to don't know the story, but the pastor who's the full-time pastor here right now is going to be retiring. I'm going to be replacing him. I've been part-time here for a year. Last October, it was a year. And so I preach, he preaches, we have another elder who preaches, and then we bring in guest preachers that we know and things like that. But so we have a team of preachers, and it's kind of the same thing with our worship team. So currently, as I said earlier, it used to be me and another gal that would swap back and forth. We would each do kind of 2 Sundays a month and alternate. And now God has blessed us with a lot of talent and people who are good at it. And so we have 4 worship leaders. So they essentially do it once a month. And then when there's that weird 5th Sunday, one of them does that one each time. But and a lot of the people on those specific worship teams are shared. So a lot of them do, even one of the couple of the worship leaders do it multiple times a month, but they're not the leader necessarily. Yeah. So probably how that will end up. So we're not done changing, right? Yeah. By no means do we have this thing nailed down. So probably we will, we've already talked about it more than once. We'll end up with one worship team with more than one leader, if that makes sense. And so they'll probably take turns and shift and do their own thing, but and you'll just be on worship. But if you have to miss this week or if you're away, that kind of thing. So we're eventually going to have one worship team, probably with more than one leader as a part of it. But share the load is an important thing here,
Yeah.
So,
well, I would imagine, I mean, going back to the whole purpose of this episode, as far as the flow of service, I would imagine that would help a bit, especially because, I mean, so for example, we're going back to the preaching thing. Like I remember, it was last month, actually, I preached 3 different Sundays at 3 different churches, and I was ecstatic to be back at my church, not preaching that 4th one, because it was, I mean, you do that so much that then it becomes this, okay, well, who am I? I need to be fed as well. Like I need to hear preaching as well. So I would imagine it would be very similar as a worship leader that you're like, okay, well, I was leading. I want to be part of the body participating now.
Yep.
And how that for me would go into the flow is that, that just makes it to where it's fresh and it's the people that are in front doing the flow for, like we talked about, a purpose and, not just arbitrarily. It makes it to where you can be prepared, you can be energized, you're not burnt out, which is a huge thing in ministry, so that the congregation, because that's why we have the flow anyway for the body, can, worship, like you said, distraction free. We're not wondering why the guy's got bags under his eyes or he's not prepared or
we're over 3 slides behind,
the 4th slide guy.
Yeah.
always gets the brunt of it. But I think that, that structure, like we talked about, is extremely helpful to the flow because you're not so burnt out. You don't have to be prepared every week. You can just be a part of the body. So
yeah.
Excellent. All right. So hopefully that was helpful. And it's very easy if you attend the same church for a very long time not to realize or just to kind of forget that there are different sorts of ways to set this up, reasons to set this up. And not that, like we said in the first episode, we're totally right. You have to do it our way or you're wrong. because you, So just
yeah.
take notes.
Well, yeah. Just yep. I hope you guys are pen in hand. During the whole. No,
but like hopefully you've learned something helpful that maybe you don't do or maybe you can take from this. That's kind of the point of this conversation. And the next episode, we will be talking about what?
Additional ministries.
Oh, this is going to be, I am so excited for this conversation.
Stuff besides Sunday morning.
Yeah. So anyway, I think this will be, that one will be extremely interesting as well for anybody that's in youth ministry, children's ministry, any other ministry. So anyway,
it'll probably get a few comments.
I would imagine. Yeah, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it next episode. So thank you guys for listening, and thank you if you guys are watching on YouTube, watching it as well. We'll see you next time.